Imagine leaving your home and never being seen again. Tonight, you'll hear 3 true stories of people who vanished into nothing. Story 1. The Vanishing Hiker. October settled like cold smoke over the Colorado foothills, and the tourist chatter thinned to whispers that scattered between the pines. Daniel Harper, 32, fit and methodical, told his roommate he would do a fast afternoon loop before the light died behind the ridge. He packed a single bottle, a compact first aid kit, a folded map with pencil marks, and his phone sitting at 78% battery. His roommate heard the front door catch and release, a familiar sound that felt final only in hindsight, like a seal pressed onto cooling wax. At 3:42, Daniel backed his Subaru into the last shaded slot by the trailhead, aligning the tires neatly inside faded white paint. The trail climbed in switchbacks that tasted of iron and damp bark, and winds sighed through beetle-killed trunks like something practicing a human voice. Daniel's footsteps fell into a rhythm, measured and patient, the kind of cadence that keeps thoughts tidy until the forest insists on rearranging them. He snapped a photo of a sandstone outcrop, light leaking golden across its cracks, and he texted it to his sister with a leaf emoji and nothing else. At 5:12, the shadows stretched thin and tall, while birds began a sudden chorus that had more urgency than melody, as if warning the ground. A chip of moon rose early, pale and nosy, while the paths narrowed and the drop-offs grew patient, waiting for one wrong choice to finish the math. Back at the house, his roommate poured pasta into boiling water, glanced at the clock and typed a quick message that said, "You good? No punctuation?" The message delivered sat blue and satisfied. It never turned into words back from Daniel, an ellipsis that did not blink because nothing followed. By 7:40, the pot cooled untouched on the stovetop, and the roommate began that small choreography between common sense and awkward concern. At 8:10, headlights cut across the gravel lot by the trailhead, revealing Daniel's Subaru like a faithful dog, waiting without curiosity or fear. Deputies arrived before 9, speaking in low, professional tones that felt stable, and they decided to hold a search until sunrise, which felt reasonable. Dawn reached into the valley like a careful hand, and an orange helicopter widened the world with its blades, beating the trees into cooperation. Volunteers spread along the switchbacks in bright vests, calling his name with upbeat syllables, the kind people use before they understand the stakes. Near mile 3, a ranger saw the stainless bottle placed upright in the center of the path. The cap fingered tight and not a scuff in the dust. Boot prints overlapped everywhere around it, too many to trust, but none seemed to wander into brush or tumble toward those patient drop-offs. A dog team pulled hard for 100 yards, then balked as if the scent hit a wall, pawing the ground and whining at emptiness like it could answer. They worked outward in boxes, neat geometry imposed on wild space, because neat geometry makes people feel smarter than the problems they face. The helicopter dipped over a narrow ravine, chasing a reflection that pretended to be a mirror. But it was only a sliver of meltwater pretending. On the second afternoon, a searcher radioed that he heard whistling from the north spur, the tune uncertain, like someone leafing through stations. The team angled toward it, boots scraping shale, while the whistle slid away between the trees, always close enough to tempt, never close enough to grab. They reached a clearing that offered nothing but an old fire ring and a quarter coin burnt on one side, heads warped into a distrustful grimace. The sheriff favored simple explanations, because simple explanations close files, and he suggested a fall, a knock to the head, a quiet place to sleep forever. The roommate asked whether people who fall put their bottle upright and lock their car, and the sheriff said grief makes questions wear costumes. A week later, posters replaced the cafe chalkboard drawings, and Daniel's smile stared down at specials for squash soup and discounted trail mix. His sister flew in with 2 duffels, one full of clothing to make the room smell like family, and one full of nerves that chattered like cut glass. They drove the route he would have driven, counting mailboxes and reflectors, and every marker looked like it wanted to confess something unhelpful. 3 months passed, which is how long it takes some forests to decide they are finished sharing what they are willing to share with strangers. In January, a technician in Utah noticed a brief handshake on a cell tower register, a single device greeting and retreating like a guilty wave. The device ID matched Daniel's phone, a number his sister still dialed at night. listening to the ring like a heartbeat that refused to choose a rhythm. Deputies triangulated desert highways and shuttered gas stations, but the ping never repeated, and the tower records turned bureaucratic and shy. A clerk shrugged, printed a map with highlighter scars. It said sometimes systems hiccup, which is what systems say when they are embarrassed to be wrong. The roommate gathered Daniel's boots into a box, then put them back by the door, then boxed them again. Because rituals can argue without words. A hiker posted online about a strange man standing on a ridge edge at dusk, motionless and narrow, as if he were pretending to be part of the tree line. The hiker zoomed the photo at home and claimed he saw a face turned away and a backpack with a torn shoulder strap, and the internet flared. Deputies hiked to the ridge with measured steps, greeted by a wind that curled and uncurled like a long ribbon, searching for an audience. The ridge held only a dead snag that could look like a man if you needed it to, and the torn strap belonged to a tarp that the sun had peeled. Daniel's sister kept the voicemail where his voice said, "Hey, it's me. Leave it." And she played it to remind the air how he sounded when he was reachable. She sifted his journals for a secret urge to vanish, but she mostly found grocery lists, jokes about faulty camp stoves, and gratitude for small mornings. A psychic wrote an email insisting the bottle marked a boundary that was not a boundary, and the family filed it beside coupons and unkind comments. A geologist suggested mine shafts collapsed and unmarked, mouths in the earth that swallow names and cough nothing back, which is one kind of answer. A search captain folded the map along new creases and told the sister that sometimes the mountain keeps one thing because it believes it deserves a souvenir. Spring found wildflowers rehearsing their brief color, and the trail grew busy with people who never met Daniel, but trusted the path with their weekends. Someone replaced the missing poster with a fresh copy, and a hiker tucked a daisy into the tape, and the petals shook in the breeze like a small flag. The roommate moved apartments, slowly and without ceremony, packing Daniel's boots last, then placing them by the new door because superstition travels. At night, the roommate practiced not listening for the click of a key in a lock, which is harder than you think when silence becomes a generous host. Every so often, a number from Utah called and hung up, and the roommate answered again and again, because hope is not a strategy, but it is persistent. 1 year later, a storm cracked the ridge with lightning, and the burn scar opened an old deer track that ran parallel to the main loop. A pair of college kids followed it for curiosity and exercise, then stopped when they saw bright fabric tucked beneath a ledge like a shy animal. They climbed down carefully and found a blue jacket, sun-bleached to ward gray, with a pocket zipped around a folded map that smelled faintly of rain. The map showed Daniel's pencil marks, time-stamped with tiny circles, and a note that said, "Try Ridge Spur if light holds," written in an impatient hand. There were no bones beneath the jacket, no phone in the pocket, and no answers resting quietly like fossils, only absence pretending to be evidence. Forensic teams combed the spur with patience wearing boots, and they sifted ash and dirt through stainless screens, listening for the small talk of teeth. They found a cheap watch that had stopped at 5:19. The watches like to be dramatic without permission, and nobody trusted that theater. They found a plastic whistle, scuffed at the mouthpiece, and the search captain asked whether anyone remembered the radio call about whistling in the dark. The captain wrote a report that did not speculate, because reports are not allowed to be human, and the items were logged as property awaiting claimant. Daniel's sister signed for the jacket and pressed her face to the fabric. And for a moment, the room smelled like pine, and then it only smelled like dust. The sheriff retired with a scrapbook of commendations and a whispered regret about a bottle placed upright, like a polite question nobody answered. A rookie deputy asked whether to box the file or keep it close for review, and the sheriff said keep it where the living can trip over it and remember. The roommate married a quiet person who understood that some chairs stay empty, and some boots stay by doors, and some names stay in present tense. Every first snow, they drive to the trailhead and sit with the engine off, watching flakes fill old footprints until the ground pretends nobody ever walked there. When they finally drive away, the headlights sweep across the kiosk, where the poster once hung, and the plywood looks almost relieved to be bare. If you ask hikers about Daniel, they will tell you the mountain is honest. Because the mountain shows you what it is if you are willing to look long enough. If you ask the geologist, he will draw diagonal lines on a map and speak about fractures. Because rocks prefer math to myth, and they do not apologize. If you ask Daniel's sister, she will say he stepped into a space that was not on the map, a a space that borrowed him and forgot to give him back politely. And if you stand on the spur at dusk and purse your lips around a cheap whistle, you might hear an answer that sounds like your own breath coming home. You will turn toward it, certain that you are close. And the sound will move just beyond reach, walking the edge where certainties lose their balance. The case remains open in the bureaucratic sense, which means a number exists for it and a drawer and a key on a ring that is heavier than it looks. Unsolved feels like a word you say when you want to stop talking, but for the people who loved him, unsolved is a tense you must live inside daily. Sometimes a postcard arrives at the old apartment addressed to Daniel, a marketing list unwilling to grieve, offering discounts for gear he cannot use. His sister keeps every postcard in a shoebox because throwing them away feels like discarding invitations, and she is not finished waiting to be invited. If he walked out of the trees tomorrow, tired and thinner and full of a reason nobody could accept, she would hand him the box and say, "Start here, please." Story 2. The night clerk who checked himself out the roadside motel sat behind a shuttered diner, its vacancy sign flickering with a tired rhythm that made the darkness look alive, and truck air brakes sighed like distant waves. The carpet smelled like old coffee and rain, as the ice machine coughed once every few minutes, and the front desk bell had a dent that hinted at a long argument with time. 24-year-old Miguel Ortiz worked the night shift for the quiet and for the second job pay. He studied from midnight to 3, and he liked the way a lobby gathers stories. On a Tuesday in late March, a cold front dragged a wide skirt of low clouds across Interstate 25. The parking lot glistened like spilled ink, and the wind checked every door twice. Miguel clocked in at 10:56, according to the timestamp, that later would be replayed frame by frame. And he placed a thermos beside the bell like a small lighthouse. His manager, a woman who counted quarters like they could multiply under pressure, reminded him to do the corridor checks on the hour and to log any guest complaints with polite precision. He nodded with the practiced ease of a person who has learned that managers value the appearance of attention as much as attention itself, and he took the lantern marked maintenance. Cameras watched the lobby from 2 angles, one aimed at the desk and one at the front door. And a third camera covered the hallway intersection where carpet patterns changed like tides. At 11:12, a couple argued quietly about a lost charger. The kind of argument that is really about fatigue, and Miguel smiled and handed them a spare with a gentle apology to furniture. At 11:40, a delivery truck parked crooked across 3 spots. The driver bought a room with cash and declined a receipt, and the camera caught him glancing up as if guiltily saluting the lens. Midnight stretched the building thinner. Lights hummed a softer tone, and the clock in the office winked the seconds like a tired eye choosing to stay open out of duty. Miguel opened a textbook about electrical systems, traced circuits with a pen he chewed unconsciously, and paused only to note a draft that seemed to crawl under the lobby doors. At 12:30, he performed the first corridor check, radio on his belt, keys like tiny bells in his pocket, when he walked past doors that vibrated faintly with televisions pretending to be company. He logged a minor leak outside room 118. It's a steady drip from an elbow joint in the vending nook, and he set a bucket beneath it, adding an apology note that made the machine look guilty. Back at the desk, he found an envelope without a stamp sitting under the bell. His name written in pencil with shaky lines, and inside a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, scarred by a crease. He asked the security camera in a whisper whether anyone had approached while he made the rounds. Then he laughed at himself. Then he rewound the lobby feed exactly 10 minutes and saw only wind. The front doors nudged in their frames whenever a gust leaned a shoulder. The floor mat curled where wheels had chewed it. And nothing crossed the threshold except reflections of passing headlights. He shrugged and placed the Queen beside the keyboard like a mascot, and he sent a text to a friend that read, "I work at a haunted casino now. Wish me luck," and a ghost emoji that looked uninvested. At 1:07, the hallway camera recorded a motion blur that looked like a person without the courtesy of a face, a shadow that flowed like water and then decided to become edges again. Miguel walked the corridor 2 minutes later, paused where the blur had been, and rubbed his arms against a sudden cold that did not belong to the thermostat. Then he marked the time in the log. Woman called the desk from room 210 to report whispering in the vent. Her voice carried both embarrassment and insistence, and Miguel apologized to the vent for putting it in this position. He carried the ladder down the hallway, climbed carefully, and pressed his ear to the metal grill while his breath fogged the stir of stale air like a small cloud trying to decide its shape. He heard nothing except the polite churn of the blower, which is a sound that always pretends it has nothing to hide. And he told the guests that the building settles like all tired bodies do. On his way back, the corridor lights dimmed for a heartbeat and then steadied. And the exit sign flickered a single time as if trying to wink without being obvious, and he frowned at it gently. At 1:43, the manager's office camera caught him counting the till, separating stacks by color and by superstition, because he liked his realms of order to stand in neat columns. At 2 in the morning, the wind dropped as if a giant hand had closed around the building. And the sudden silence made the ice machine cough sound personal, like a person clearing a throat to speak. A bus of college athletes pulled in without warning. They stumbled through, check-in with laughter the color of exhaustion. And the lobby reanimated with duffel bags and questions about wake-up calls. Miguel assigned rooms like a card dealer who refuses to lose his rhythm. He circled names on breakfast vouchers as if drawing gentle halos. And the noise lifted the building's spirits enough to be convincing. When the bus settled and the elevator finally decided to rest, he returned to the desk and found a second envelope, again without a stamp. His name in the same patient pencil and another playing card. This time it was the Queen of Spades. Corners softened by use, the face scratched across the mouth like a censored secret, and he felt an involuntary shiver that annoyed him with its melodrama. He checked the doors again and reviewed the feed again. And like a magic trick performed for an audience of one, the recording showed no hand delivering the card. No sleeve, no shadow, no body. He texted his friend a photo, typing, 2 queens now. I guess I am being promoted. And his friend replied with a row of knives and a shrug. Modern hieroglyphics for, be careful, but tell me more. A little after 2:30, a guest in 132 complained that his television turned itself to a shopping channel, which might be a haunting or might simply be capitalism, and Miguel offered batteries. He returned to the lobby to find the logbook reopened to a page from last winter, a page he had never written on. And across it, someone had penciled the sentence, "Do not follow the queen to the stairs." He stared at the looping letters until the loops began to look like tiny nooses. Then he closed the book with more force than needed. And he felt foolish for the bravado because the room heard it. 2:58. The hallway intersection camera recorded Miguel walking toward the stairwell at the end of the north wing, his lantern swinging a polite semicircle, his shoulders steady. At 2:59, the same camera recorded him stepping into the stairwell door. The door rebounded slightly before sealing, and the lantern light sliced once across the floor like a brief comet. At 3:02, the stairwell camera showed not Miguel, not a shadow, not a bird or a moth, only the slow tremor of fluorescent light and the stubborn stair treads keeping their secrets like veterans. At 3:10, the lobby camera caught the front desk telephone buzzing once, without an incoming call, the handset humming with a dial tone that had not been requested, and then falling quiet again. At 3:14, the north wing camera saw a shape at the far end that could be a person deciding not to be seen. And then the feed blinked to black for 1 second, which is an eternity for tech. At 3:18, the manager's office camera recorded the cash drawer sliding out, as if pulled by a polite ghost. Then sliding back in, then resting, a performance that meant nothing was missing. Room 210 called again about whispering, this time with the certainty of someone who has been introduced to a problem twice. But the desk phone did not ring because Miguel was not there to hear it. At 3:24, the elevator opened on the lobby without a request. Doors spread like a patient mouth, doors closed with a sigh. And the car moved up 1 floor and then came back empty. At 3:30, the college athletes sent a text to the front desk number asking for more towels. The phone on the desk lit with a patient blue square, and nobody pressed reply because nobody remained. At 3:36, the corridor exit sign flickered again, and the flicker poured green across the carpet like a spill, and when it steadied, the light looked pleased with itself for surviving. At 4, the manager arrived early because a snow warning had escalated. She wore a coat like armor and a face like a calculator, and she carried a paper bag of breakfast burritos. She greeted the empty desk with a cheerful good morning that sounded wrong in the lobby's throat. Then she frowned at the unattended logbook and the thermos breathing a little steam. She called Miguel's name once, then twice, then in Spanish the third time, as if language itself could be a tether, and the word fell behind the counter with a soft thud. No microphone cared to record. She checked the security feeds with the intimacy of a person who knows which cameras lie most politely. She watched Miguel enter the stairwell and not come out, and the burritos went cold. She opened the stairwell door and found only air, an echo that did not belong to any voice she knew, and the smell of damp concrete that all stairwells share like an inheritance. Police arrived with vests and pads in the assumption that buildings must tell the truth because people designed them, and they followed protocols like recipes followed by hungry men. They traced the steps on the feed, measured the time gaps, tried the door that led to an exterior landing, found it locked from the inside with the bar engaged, obedient as a well-trained dog. They searched the roof with flashlights that made the night step back a little. They checked the maintenance closets. They thumped every hollow panel in the belief that secrets sound different when struck. They found the 2 envelopes under the counter. And they found the logbook page with the warning about the Queen. They looked at the manager the way people look at a person who might finally gasp the solution. She raised her hands and said she had never seen that handwriting in her life. And the nearest officer wrote this sentence down in a notebook, as if the notebook could weigh truth accurately. Before noon, a detective asked for last winter's logbooks, the ones stored in a plastic tote beneath a shelf that listed to one side like a tired sailor, and they pulled spiral pads that smelled like dust. In the January entries, a brand new night clerk named Eileen had written neatly about ice storms and buses and a whistle that came and went in ductwork. And the detectives underlined whistle twice. On a page dated January 17th, Eileen had written, found an unaddressed envelope at the bell, Queen of Hearts inside, and the manager swallowed hard enough to make the room pause for her throat. 2 days later, in the old book, Eileen had written, second envelope with Queen of Spades, and on the next page in a slanted line, do not follow the Queen to the stairs, and then no more entries. The manager whispered that Eileen had quit by text that week, claiming a family emergency in Oklahoma, and nobody had ever reached her again, because her number returned a robotic shrug. They pulled the stairwell tread plates, found only dust and bolts, no trapdoor, no crawl space, no prize behind door number anything, and the building looked offended by the accusation. They reviewed previous camera footage across 3 months and found that the north wing lens occasionally blurred without cause, like an eye remembering a dream while awake. They searched dumpsters and the drainage culvert and the scrub behind the diner, where bottles glittered like unfriendly stars, and they found a single playing card face down in the mud. When they turned it over with a pencil tip, it was a jack of diamonds, which meant either the pattern had broken or someone else was now playing, and nobody smiled at the metaphor. By dusk, the storm that had threatened finally arrived in full, erasing shoe prints and tire tracks with democratic grace. And the motel retreated into itself like a turtle that trusted its shell. Miguel's mother sat on the lobby couch with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she did not sip. She asked the detectives if the building had any old parts that nobody used anymore. The manager admitted that the basement had a walled-off section from a renovation in the 90s, a slice of hallway that had been abandoned rather than removed, because budgets prefer vanishing tricks. Contractors pried open drywall and coughed plaster, and a narrow corridor emerged like a scar, leading to a welded steel door that had been painted the same color as a lie told with good intentions. They cut the welds with sparks that looked like a flock of fireflies trying to remember choreography. And behind the door, they found only a storage room with metal shelving and no footprints. On the floor lay a spreading patch from a pipe leak, the shape of it coincidentally like a heart missing a corner, and everyone looked away from the symbol because detectives refused poetry. 2 months later, the security company swapped the cameras for models that do not blink under the weight of superstition, and the feeds became crisp and arrogant. New clerks were assigned in pairs for the graveyard shift, which is not how budgets like to behave, but even budgets must nod to fear occasionally if they wish to keep their jobs. Every so often, an envelope appears under the bell in the hour between 2 and 3, always without a stamp, always with pencil letters that know Miguel's name, even when new clerks are on duty. Some envelopes hold jokers cut in half. Some hold blank cards as if the deck grew bored. And sometimes there is no card at all, only a fingerprint swirl made of dust that refuses identification. The manager keeps the cards in a clear box in the office, and when auditors arrive, they step around it unconsciously. the way people step around memorials, even when they pretend not to notice. Miguel's case file lists him as missing, not deceased, because definitions do a lot of emotional heavy lifting, and families require the right boxes to be checked to stand up in the morning. His mother leaves a saint's candle on the diner window ledge each Tuesday, the flame doing the mathematics of hope while the glass sweats in summer and gathers breath in winter. Some nights the elevator opens on the lobby without being called, doors parting like pages in an old book, and the air rolls out colder than the hallway deserves, like a memory rehearsing. If you sit on the couch after midnight and watch the reflection on the polished desk bell, you might see the tiny shape of a hand lift the bell slightly and let it settle again, polite, almost shy. And if you walk to the stairwell with a lantern the way Miguel did, the door will open without complaint. The light will sweep the first step like a painter choosing a color, and then you will think better of it and go back. Story 3. The lake that gave back everything but her name. The lake was shaped like a question mark on the county map. It's a blue curve with a dot of a cove, and old men at the bait shop like to say, it always wanted answers. A summer rental cabin leaned into the trees at the north bend, its porch slats soft with age, its windows fogging with breath every evening. And the screen door obeyed gravity more than hinges. 29-year-old Leah Park arrived there on a humid Friday with 2 friends from college. It's the kind of friends who remember your cafeteria jokes and your first apartment carpet stains. They unpacked coolers with the reverence of a ritual, stacked paperbacks like promises they would not keep, and declared their intention to do nothing so perfectly that it made time jealous. The water was brown glass under the evening. Dragonflies stitched light along the reeds, and a loon sent a sound across the cove that felt like someone calling a name without letters. Leah called her mother to say the signal was decent and the cabin was rustic in a good way, which is a sentence that tries to keep splinters in their place, and her mother sounded relieved. They grilled vegetables that dripped and hissed and turned the air sweet. They played cards with laughing accusations that carried across the water, and they made the kind of plans that disappear by morning. Just after 10, a small storm walked around the rim of the lake. Lightning tracing branches in the clouds, and the porch light flickered twice, as if applauding politely from a distance. Leah stepped onto the dock to film the sky, her sandals silent on the damp boards. Her friends called out twice about safety, not because they were truly worried, but because worry is a tradition. She took 30 seconds of video, muttered that the exposure was being difficult, and set the phone on the bench to watch the night with her hands empty. The dock made that quiet creak that wood makes when it has not decided whether to settle or remember being a tree. And a fish broke the surface with a sound like a skipped heartbeat. Leah's friends went inside to search for a lighter, voices rustling among cupboards. The cabin light bowed through the screen door like a yellow spine. A minute later, they returned to the porch, called Leah's name with the confidence of people who expect a simple echo. And when the echo did not behave, they tried again, with a laugh less certain. The bench held her phone, face down, camera still open to the storm. A single drop of rain smeared across the screen like a thumbprint from weather, and the dock stretched empty toward the quiet. They ran to the end and looked into the cove, and the water offered them only their own upside-down faces. Hair in strange orientations, mouths open with questions that could not swim. The sheriff arrived with a deputy who grew up on this lake and spoke to it like an uncle, and they swept the cove with beams that made minnows flash like punctuation. A rescue boat slid out with serious men in orange. They crisscrossed the question mark like they were solving it with a pencil. And the motor grumbled at the weeds for being too confident. They found nothing in the first pass. No clothing, no shoe, no ripple that meant more than fish. The sheriff shook his head the way people do when math refuses to equal what they want. Divers went in at dawn, bubbles rising like a counted prayer, fingers combing silt that had waited a long time to be touched, and reeds leaning as if trying to read the report over shoulders. By mid-morning, they found a hair tie caught on a submerged branch, not conclusive, just suggestive, like a sentence that never gets to its verb. And the deputy wrote it down without relief. Leah's mother arrived before noon with a bag of sensible clothes, and that face parents wear when the world has behaved badly, but no one has yet been punished for it. She sat on the porch with a borrowed blanket in the heat, and the sheriff knelt to speak at her level about likelihoods and currents and the way accidents do not ask permission before happening. The phone on the bench contained the last video. 30 seconds of clouds seem exploding with brief light, and in the 10th second, a shape crossed the frame that could be a bird or could be intent. Experts said it was an insect near the lens, wings catching the flash and turning into a bigger idea. The mother replayed that 10th second until it stretched longer than the whole day. Down on the dock, a state trooper found wet footprints that led halfway back to the shore and then stopped. Prints that were not clear enough to measure, yet clear enough to argue about. The cabin owner insisted no one had keys except him and the rental office. And he produced both key rings with a flourish that hoped to end suspicion, and the sheriff nodded without smiling. Neighbors reported hearing laughter around 9, the kind of laughter that belongs to card games and inside jokes, and after 10 they heard the loon announce a weather decision. One neighbor said she heard an oar knock against a boat at 10:15, a hollow sound like a dropped drumstick, but that neighbor wears hearing aids and admits the lake speaks in guesswork. Another neighbor said he saw a small light drift across the cove at 10:30, not a star, not a flashlight beam, more like a glow, the color of old paper, and he scratched his beard when he said it. The sheriff thanked everyone for their attention, collected contradictions like baseball cards, and wondered how a person could fail to sink or swim and still manage to be missing. On the second day, a volunteer found Leah's sunglasses among the reeds at the far end of the question mark, lenses scratched in a new pattern that looked a little like initials meaning nothing. On the third day, a drone flown by a teenager traced a grid he had learned from a video game, and the photos revealed a shape on the lake bed near the dot of the cove, a darker comma on the page. Divers returned with weight belts and patience. They descended into the green hush, and they emerged with a navy canvas backpack that had gathered a coat of silt like dust on a forgotten shelf. Inside was Leah's paperback with damp pages that wanted to be leaves again, a bag of trail mix that had not persuaded any fish to learn about almonds, and a key on a ring with a bear charm. The cabin key remained on the porch table where someone had dropped it during the first hour, which meant the key with the bear charm belonged to a different lock, and the sheriff felt language tighten. The bear key did not fit any lock at the rental, not the sheds, not the spare padlock hanging on a nail like a sleeping eye, not the boat chain that had already been purely ornamental. A clerk at the bait shop recognized the charm from a display that had been near the register 2 summers ago, a bin where tourists chose animals like temporary totems for metal rings. She thought a local named Carson used to buy the bear ones for luck. A man who fished at odd hours and told jokes with an aftertaste, and the deputy wrote the name with care. Carson's trailer sat back from the road under 2 crooked pines, a grill rusting beside the steps, a dog dish empty of everything except old rain, and a mailbox leaning toward gossip. He was not home on the 4th day, nor on the 5th, and on the 6th day, a relative said Carson had gone to help a cousin in Duluth, which is the kind of alibi that is all highway and no witness. While the deputies searched for Carson, the lake kept its pulse. Tiny ripples stitching the surface, suns rising and falling, like an orderly schedule that refuses personal requests. Leah's mother spoke to the water every morning, words neither angry nor begging, more like a teacher greeting a classroom that has not decided whether to behave. She asked the sheriff whether the lake had taken people before, and he answered with a list that made him look at his own hands afterward. 5 names in 20 years, 2 bodies returned, 3 not. She asked whether the lake ever gave back anything besides people, and he said sometimes it gives up bottles with messages that have no handwriting, only stains that look like continents. At night, frogs sawed their little instruments near the shore. In the cabin screen door, exhaled a tired breath each time the wind held it open for a second and then let go. On the 7th morning, a kayaker found a shoe caught in reeds where the cove narrows to a ditch, a green sneaker with a white stripe, size that matched Leah, and the deputy bagged it with a sigh. A mile away in a pull-off, a camera on a park sign captured Carson's truck passing at 11:52 on the first night, heading toward the launch ramp that he usually avoided because of fees. The ramp attendant remembered closing early for lightning. He remembered chaining the gate. And he did not remember any truck slipping through, because he likes to believe chains matter. A game warden pointed out that the East Shore has an unmarked path down to a muddy shelf where locals launch for free, and in the drone footage a thin line could be seen like a tendon. They searched that shelf and found tire tracks printed into clay like confession letters, then half erased by rains. And in one print, a pressed coin dated the year Leah was born, which made everyone quiet. Deputies finally located Carson on the 8th day at a cousin's garage, the cousin real and irritated. And Carson smelled like bait and smoke and the stubborn denial of a tired man. He said he had been sleeping on and off in his truck, said he knew nothing about any girl, said the key charm must have fallen from his pocket weeks before because he had noticed it missing. Allowed a search of the truck under the kind of shrug a person wears when convinced he is being punished for an unlucky coincidence, and the truck offered nothing but crumbs and a map with greasy corners. The cousin confirmed the dates loosely, his conversations about tools and fishing that flowed in memory without anchoring, and the sheriff's pencil hovered over his pad without landing. They let Carson go with a warning to remain reachable, and he promised without enthusiasm. And the lake breathed a small wind across the reeds, as if to remind everyone who writes the weather. On the 9th evening, the drone kid shared an edited video online, smoothing the search grid into a time-lapse, and at minute 3, a pattern appeared that nobody noticed in real time. The ripples moved in a ring that expanded and contracted twice near the dot of the cove. While no boats or birds crossed the area, and the pattern looked almost like breathing performed by geography, experts explained it as thermal layers arguing with each other, a weather conversation captured at the right angle. The deputy nodded without absorbing any of the theory. Leah's mother watched that ring on a loop and said quietly that it looked like a sign for yes presented by a stubborn teacher, and the deputy closed his notebook with a respect he had not planned to feel. The next morning, the water in the cove stood flatter than glass, as if it had made a decision to be a mirror, and every kneeling person saw their face look like a stranger thinking their thoughts. On day 11, a child on the public beach picked up a bracelet from the shallows, wooden beads on elastic beads painted with tiny flowers, beads that matched a photo on Leah's social page. The bracelet was intact, which means either it slid off a relaxed wrist or it chose to be found. And detectives do not like to consider the second option in front of families. They walked the shoreline for a mile and found nothing else except bottle caps and a comb, and the comb belonged to a different story that nobody wanted to tell. At sunset, a heron stood at the edge like a grandfather refusing to sit. Its reflection made a second heron that seemed more patient, and nobody saw any tragedy in that except the mother. She faced the water and said Leah's full name, not a nickname, the formal name like a ceremony. And the echo came back softer, making the name sound undecided. 2 weeks in, the formal search ended, which is a phrase officials use in order to keep budgets honest. And volunteers continued in smaller groups with thermoses and shore shoes. The cabin rental clocked back to normal, new guests not told about the missing. Because businesses believe ignorance can be part of comfort, and they are not always wrong. A month later, the lake level dropped after a dry spell, and a fisherman standing knee-deep near the cove felt something solid with his heel, like a wooden step where no stairs should be. He reached down through silt and pulled up a small jewelry box, the cheap kind sold at roadside antique barns. And inside lay Leah's driver's license laminated in a way that was not official. The photo was hers and not hers, a familiar smile under a light that changed the eyes. And the sheriff held the card like a living thing that might bite or sing. A forensic tech noted that laminate machines exist in offices and in basements. And sometimes people make souvenirs of strangers without thinking through the ethics, and the room cooled a degree. The box held a folded note made from grocery list paper, the pencil faint from water, and the words said, "She is not here, so stop waking the lake." And the handwriting looked young and stubborn. The message traveled through televisions and comment sections with predictable velocity. And theories ranged from prank to cult to a rival county marketing a different lake. And the sheriff wore earplugs metaphorically. Carson presented himself without being asked, swore at the note on principle, asked who laminates things when everybody owns a phone, and his cousin tugged his sleeve to reduce the volume. The sheriff thanked him for the performance, and then asked him to leave. And Carson left with the offended dignity of a man who believes the world owes him at least one easy evening. Autumn arrived on the water like a long exhale. The loons stopped announcing weather and began to consider migration, and tourists dwindled to the kind who read quietly. Leah's mother returned every Sunday and sat with a thermos of tea that cooled by noon. She spoke to the lake with patient gossip, and sometimes she laughed in the middle of a sentence by mistake. Once, she saw a small boat drift across the cove without a person, the oars at rest, the rope trailing like a tail. And she called the sheriff with a voice she tried to keep neutral. The boat belonged to a rental 3 cabins down. The owner said a storm had slipped the knot, which is a thing storms like to do, and the mother nodded at the explanation while looking beyond it. That night, a ring appeared again on the water. A gentle pulse, expanding and contracting twice, and the mother watched it without moving, as if the lake and she had agreed to a treaty of stillness. Winter locked the surface into a shiny sheet that carried footprints from one shore to another, and people skated with unwise grace while the bait shop kept fewer hours. The sheriff sent a team with ground-penetrating radar across the ice, lines drawn carefully, signals bouncing back with the curtness of cold physics, and nothing answered with the shape of certainty. In February, a letter arrived at the station, with no return address inside a photo of the lake taken from the hill behind the bait shop, and in the lower corner, a shadow shaped like a woman on the dock. Technicians pronounced it artifact, a combination of tree line and stain on the print. And the deputy who had watched the ripple rings folded the photo into his pocket without asking permission. He walked to the dock that afternoon and stood where the shadow would have stood, and he whispered Leah's full name into the frozen air until his breath wrote a foggy version of it that drifted away. Spring freed the water with a slow shrug. Rain braided down the windows, and the cabin owner oiled the screen door until it decided to behave like a door again. Leah's mother set a small plaque on the porch post with permission. Circle of metal that did not claim a death, only a date and a name, and even the wind seemed to read it softly. On the first warm night, teenagers jumped from the county pier because that is how teenagers measure courage, and the water held them and gave them back, as if they were receipts in good standing. The drone kid flew again and uploaded again, and viewers noticed again that the cove sometimes breathed in rings without any visible cause, as if the lake rehearsed a heartbeat for an audience. The sheriff retired at the end of that summer, handing the case box to a younger deputy with a careful look that said, "Keep listening, even when the water pretends to be finished talking." The new deputy visited Leah's mother once a month, brought muffins that crumbled distractingly, and never promised results he could not produce, which is a language families recognize as respect. He kept the photo with the artifact shadow pinned inside his locker, not for proof, only for the reminder that sometimes patterns prefer to be felt before they are measured. When he could not sleep, he drove to the North Bend and parked with the windows cracked, listening to frogs and faint motors and the private monologues of wind, and he watched the dock. If the dock ever shifted, it did so with ordinary reasons, temperature and weight and wood memory, and the deputy repeated these words as if they were a bedtime prayer for grown men. Still, some nights he believed he saw a figure at the end of the boards, not waving, not turning. It's only occupying the last piece of wood between land and the sentence the lake insists on finishing. Leah remains missing in the official sense, which keeps a door from shutting. The plaque on the porch does not rust because hands touch it often, polishing it with hopeful oil. The key with the bear charm sits in an evidence bag that smells faintly of lake water and rubber, and no locksmith has ever matched it, which means either the lock is gone or the riddle enjoys its privacy. Carson moved to County South and now sells bait from a cooler behind a gas station. And he tells customers that lakes prefer simple stories, which is not the opinion he used to hold. The cabin rents every summer. The guest book contains one blank page, where a surly clerk tore out a sheet. People write around the wound without comment, because politeness is also a kind of superstition. If you visit the North Bend at dusk and listen without asking questions, you will hear a loon and some laughter from a far deck. And you might hear a name that could be Leah if you have already decided that it is. On the anniversary, Leah's mother stands on the dock with the plaque behind her and the cove breathing gently. She says, "I will take answers in any language this water speaks." A breeze lifts the edge of her jacket, as if someone short and familiar had tucked a finger there to get her attention. And she smiles at the trick because it is better to smile when you can. The water moves in two rings and then goes still, the kind of stillness that acts like a held breath. And a dragonfly rides the last ripple like a boat deciding on a destination. When she leaves, she thanks the lake out loud for the conversation. The lake does not answer, yet the path back to the cabin feels like a hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Some mysteries become the furniture of a place, and the people who live there learn to dust around them, and the absence begins to look like something that belongs even when it should not.